Well, during the Board of Peace meeting, Trump warned Iran that, quote, bad things will happen if it doesn't make a deal with the U.S. over its nuclear program. The warning comes as the U.S. is building up its military presence in the Middle East, where Trump has reportedly deployed warships, fighter jets, and other military hardware. Trump says the world will find out in, quote, again, probably 10 days whether the U.S. will reach an agreement with Iran or take military action.
They cannot continue to threaten the stability of the entire region, and they must make a deal. Or if that doesn't happen, I maybe can understand. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But bad things will happen if it doesn't.
The U.S. president seems to have set a 10-day deadline for a deal. Tough talk, or are we really steering toward an escalation? That's a question I put to Matthew Ho. He's a former captain at the U.S. Marine Corps and State Department official. Now he's with the Eisenhower Media Network, a think tank based in the U.S.
I think this is serious, that this is not bluffing. This is not for show. This is not a stunt. The type of force the United States is putting into the Middle East is one that is capable of carrying out the operations that those in Washington, D.C. wanted to carry out. Certainly, we see the aircraft carriers, we see the destroyers, we see the fighter squadrons. But more importantly, you're seeing the specialized aircraft, so the electronic warfare aircraft and the command and control aircraft that the U.S. Air Force is only going to put into the region in the numbers that they're putting them into the region if they're serious about using them. We see the United States moving the Gerald Ford aircraft carrier back to the Mediterranean. If people recall, the Ford went from the Mediterranean to the Caribbean to take part in the operation to kidnap Nicolas Maduro, and now they're sending it back. So you already have an aircraft carrier there. Why are you going to extend this other aircraft carrier, have it go halfway around the globe if you don't think you're really going to need it? So all this, I think, is really a preparation for war, and the only way to avoid war, I think, at this point, or the likely way to avoid war at this point, is by the Iranians to capitulate.
Does this kind of force or show of force make diplomacy with Iran more likely, though? Or could it blow up the talks? Because we have seen a pretty robust rhetoric come out of Tehran as well.
Right. And I think for the Iranians here, certainly anyone looking at this would say this is hardball diplomacy, right? This is a diplomacy with a very hard line to it that is looking to not get half a loaf of bread, as they say, right, to get the full loaf. But for the Iranians, I think the context has to go back much further. The first and foremost in the Iranian minds has to be whether or not they can trust the Americans. Certainly a deal was made with the Iranians more than a decade ago, the JCPOA, which limited Iran's nuclear activities, which the Trump administration in 2018 pulled out of unilaterally, as well as the history of U.S. Iranian military conflict, more especially the last several years, the last decade or so, of U.S. and Israeli sabotage, assassinations of scientists, cyber attacks on Iran. All these things have to add up for the Iranians to bring them to a place where how could they trust the Americans, as well as also understanding that for 45 years there has been hostility towards Iran. This, of course, comes from the overthrow of the Shah, the hostage crisis in 1979. And so the Iranians, I think, have to look at this way that many in Washington, D.C., as well as in Tel Aviv, see this as a possibility for that history to culminate, for that long struggle between the U.S. and Iran to finally come to an end.
Mm-hmm. How do Iran's neighbors and the U.S. allies in the region feel about these developments?
Well, obviously, they're very concerned. You saw a concerted effort by Arab states, especially the Gulf monarchies, in the last week or two to put as much pressure as they can on the American administration to continue negotiations. We had 2 weeks ago when the talks were supposed to be in Turkey. Those got put off, and then the intercession of Arab states, again, especially the Gulf monarchies, brought those talks talks back to life, and you had those talks in Oman and now just recently in Geneva. But I think the understanding of those in the region is that this war will not be like the conflicts we've had the last couple of years between the U.S. and Israel and Iran, that this will be a war that will not be confined to Iran. This is what the Iranians themselves are saying, but will be a war with regional consequences that will last for many weeks, if not months.
This is Matthew Ho from the Center for International Policy. Thank you so much.